Good morning. My regards to Swamini and to Professor Mishra, and best wishes to the others. I am starting from where I stopped yesterday. See, the Prabhakara Mimamsaka said that in a so-called erroneous situation, I am repeating and I am emphasizing the word so-called because on the Prabhakara view, there is no error in cognition. There is error only in practice or in behavior. Now, so they are calling the erroneous situation a so-called erroneous situation, not an actual erroneous situation, because no bhranti in jnana is occurring there. They will say that there are two cognitions, one perception of the general characteristics and the other one a truncated recollection of some distant property, right? And the subject is not in a position, is not being able to distinguish between these two cognitions and their objects. And out of this Vedagraha, an unsuccessful activity is produced. Instantly, the others would object, the Nayayikos would object that Vedagraha is a negative entity and it cannot, Vedagraha is a negative entity and it cannot give rise to an activity which is a positive entity. An activity is a bhava karya. It is a bhava padartha. So, Vedagraha is aviveka, it is lack of knowledge. Alright? Agrahana of Veda, agrahana of viveka jnana. Aviveka means, viveka jnana means Veda grahana, and aviveka is absence of Veda grahana. So, Vedagraha cannot give rise to any activity. The Prabhakara philosophers would reply to this objection that we have never said that the activity arises from Vedagraha. We have said that you have not understood my position correctly. We have said that agrihita Veda jnana dvayo, there are two cognitions and the distinction between them was not perceived by the subject, and those two cognitions have given rise to the activity. So, it is the two cognitions which are positive entities, they have given rise to the activity. So, the activity has not arisen out of a negative entity. It has arisen from two positive cognitions. But please note, I am emphasizing this point, that none of these cognitions is a Vishishta Buddhi, is a determinate cognition, because the perception only reveals, only manifests a substance, a this. But the this is not presented as qualified by sarpatva, by the property being a snake, being snake. Whereas the truncated recollection presents the distant property, snakehood or sarpatva, but that qualifier is not presented as qualifying the qualificant this. So, none of these two cognitions is a determinate one, because the cognition of the substance is not presenting the substance as qualified by any quality, and the recollection of the qualifier or the property is not presenting the property as qualifying a qualificant. So this is the Prabhakara position. The most important objections against this Prabhakara position were put forward by the Nayayikos. The Advaitins and others, they also put forward, they also brought up many criticisms, but I should say the most important objections were put forward by the Nayayikos, by Vachashpati Mishra himself in his Tatparya Tika. I am presenting it very succinctly. Vachashpati Mishra is asking the Prabhakara Mimamsakas Please tell me, what is the object of the disputed silver awareness? Is the thing present before the subject the object before the object of the disputed silver awareness, or the silver is the object of the disputed silver awareness? If you say that the object present before the subject, that is the this, is the object of the disputed silver awareness, the vivadadhyasitam rajato jnanam, then the vivadadhyasitam rajato jnanam is manifesting the thing present before the subject as something else. The thing present before the subject is in fact a mother of pearl. It is in fact, in the case of the snake rope illusion, it is a rope. The thing present before the subject is a rope. It is not the snake. But the vivadadhyasitam sarpogyanam is presenting the rope as a snake. So it is distorting its nature, it is presenting the thing present before the subject as something else. So you cannot but consider, you cannot but call this vivadadhyasitam sarpogyanam as a bhranti jnanam. You are bound to regard it to be a bhranti jnanam. Why? Because it is distorting the nature of its own object. Okay? And you cannot say that sarpo is the object of this disputed sarpogyanam. Okay? You cannot say that the distant sarpo, the distant snake, is the object of this disputed sarpogyanam. You can't say that. Why? Because the distant sarpo, the distant snake, is not present here. And the subject cannot have any sense-object contact with the distant snake. Right? So, the subject cannot have a perceptual cognition of the distant snake. Okay? Bachespati Mishra is not talking of Jnana-Lakshana, Sanikarsha, nothing. Okay? He is only saying that the distant snake cannot feature in the subject's perception. The distant snake cannot feature. At least you can't say that.
That's the understanding.
Yes. Bachespati here is not presenting his own position, he is just refuting the Pravakara position. He is asking the Pravakaras, tell me, what is the object of the disputed Rajatogyanam or the disputed Sarpogyanam? The thing present before the, if you say that the thing present before the subject is the object of the disputed Sarpogyanam, then the Sarpogyanam is distorting the nature of the presented object. So you must admit that this is a Bhranti Jnana. You can't say that there is no Bhranti Jnana and Sarvam Jnanam Yathartham Evo. You can't stick to your thesis that Sarvam Jnanam Yathartham Evo. And if you say that the distant sarpo is the object of the disputed sarpogyanam, then how can you explain the perceptual character of the cognition? Okay, you have not proposed any kind of sense-object contact between the presented this and the distant property. You have no idea of any kind of sense-object contact. The idea of a sense-object contact between the presented thing and the distant thing was proposed much later by Gangeshu. Okay, the idea of Jnana-Lakshana Sannikarsha came in Tattva Chintamani, in the Annatha Khativada of Tattva Chintamani. So that was a much later development, much later than Vachespati. Vachespati flourished only in the 9th century AD. So, what is the object? The Pravakaras would have to say. Vachespati is then putting forward another inference, another argument. The inference is of the following form. Yes, Dr. Dash. Welcome. Vachespati is then putting forward another inference. The inference is of the following form. Vivadadhyasitam rajato jnanam. He is speaking of the shell silver illusion. Vivadadhyasitam rajato jnanam. Yesterday, Swamini asked whether these stock examples are in Shankara Bhashya or in the Upanishads. The Upanishads mainly are concerned with Prakriti Vikaro Bhavo. That is why they gave the example of clay and also of gold, and Bhacharam Vikaro Namadheyam Mrittika Iteva Satyam. They are actually talking of Prakriti Vikaro Bhavo. Not exactly of an illusion, but they are saying that Prakriti Vikaro Bhavo, the Vikaro is an appearance. It is Nama Rupa Matra. Okay. So there the context was entirely different. And this shell silver illusion, Vachuspati Mishra, as early as in Bhamati or in his Tatparya Tika, he is referring to this shell silver illusion. Panchapadika Karo and Vivarnacharya also, they are also referring to the shell silver illusion. So these examples also are old enough. Vachuspati, Panchapadika Karo, Vivarnacharya, all of them are referring to these examples. And now they will say, Vachuspati is putting forward another inference. Vivadadhyasitam Rajata Jnanam Purovarti Vastu Vishayakam. Vivadadhyasitam Rajata Jnanam Purovarti Vastu Vishayakam. Rajatarthina Purovarti Vastu Vishayako Pravritti Janakatvat. Rajatarthina Purovarti Vastu Vishayako Pravritti Janakatvat. Yat Yadarthina Yad Vishayaka Pravritti Janakam Tat Tad Vishayakam. See, the Vyapti is Yad Jnanam, Yad Arthina, Yad Vishayaka Pravritti Janakam Tat Tad Vishayakam. Tad Jnanam, Tad Vishayakam. Sampratipanyo Samyak Rajata Jnanavat. That is the Annaya Drishtanto. Sampratipanyo Samyak Rajata Jnanavat. So I am repeating the inference once again because Professor Patro and Dr. Das came inside just now. Vachuspati Mishra is putting forward an inference to refute Akhyativada of the Pradhakaro Mimamsakas. He is saying, Vivadadhyasitam Rajata Jnanam Purovarti Vastu Vishayakam Yad Jnanam Yad Arthinam Yad Vishayaka Jnana Janakam Tad Jnanam Tad Vishayakam. Purovarti Vastu Vishayaka. So the hetu is Purovarti Vastu Vishayaka Pravritti Janakatva. We should say Purovarti Vastu Vishayaka Pravritti Janakatva Sampratipanna Samyak Rajata Jnanavat. So this disputed silver awareness is about the presented object because it is giving rise to an action with regard to the presented object. The subject is going forward to take the presented object. He is not going to a jewelry shop which is located somewhere else to get hold of the distant silver, or he is not going to a zoo to see a distant snake. He is proceeding towards the presented object. So, the Vivadadhyasita Rajato Jnana is about the presented object because it gives rise to an action which has a relation to the presented object. It gives rise to an action in relation to the presented object. The action has reference to the presented object. Okay? So the knowledge which gives rise to the action must be about the presented object. But the cognition is not presenting the presented object properly. It is distorting the nature of the presented object. So you must regard the cognition, the disputed cognition, to be a wrong one, to be a non-veridical one. So you are bound to admit non-veridical cognitions. You cannot say sarvam jnanam yathartham ego. You will have to give up your thesis that all anubhuti, all apprehensions are veridical. You will have to give up that thesis. So this is Vachuspati's main argument. And both Vachaspati in his Tatparya Tika and Jayanta Bhatto in his Nyaya Manjari are saying that a defective sense organ, both Vachaspati Mishra and Jayanta Bhatto are saying that a defective sense organ along with the memory traces, they give rise to an erroneous cognition. The main argument of the Naiyayikos also was put forward both by Vachaspati Mishra and by Jayanta Bhatto. Vachaspati put forward that argument in his Tatparya Tika and Jayanta in his Nyaya Manjari, that two avishishta buddhis cannot give rise to a vishishta vyavahara. Two avishishta dhyanas, cognitions, two indeterminate cognitions cannot give rise to a determinate activity. So this was the main objection. Now, against the inference of Vachaspati that what is the object of the disputed silver awareness, and the inference was showing that Purovarti Vastu or the presented object is actually the object of the disputed silver awareness, the Pravakara Mimamsakas have a rejoinder against this argument. The Pravakara philosopher Shalikanatha Mishra in the Navavithi Prakarana of Prakarana Panchika asks the Naiyayikos, how do you define an object? What is an object? First give me the definition of an object. Then Shalikanatha Mishra comes up with his own definition of an object. And he is saying that ya evartha yasyang samvidhi bhasate vedya sa eva nanyadhi vidyat vedyasya lakshanam. Ya evartha yasyang samvidhi bhasate vedya sa eva nanyadhi vidyat vedyasya lakshanam. So whatever is presented in a cognition reveals that thing. So that thing is the vedya or the vishaya of that cognition. So how do we decide what is the object of a particular cognition? We have to ask ourselves, what is the cognition revealing to us? And whatever is revealed by the cognition will be the object of that cognition. Now here, the disputed silver awareness is revealing the piece of silver. So, the silver is the object of the disputed silver awareness and not the presented mother of pearl, the presented shell. So, the disputed silver awareness has performed its function quite well. It has presented its own object silver quite well. So the Pravakara Mimamsakas are saying that you cannot say, the Naiyayikos cannot say that the cognition has gone astray and has not been able to perform its own task properly. You can't say that. It has done its own work. The task of a cognition is to reveal something. And whatever is being revealed by a particular cognition is its object. So silver is the object of the disputed silver awareness, and the cognition has performed its task satisfactorily of revealing its own object. So there is nothing wrong with the cognition. This is the Pravakara answer to Vachaspati's inference. And of course the Naiyayikos would say that even if you say that the silver is the object of the disputed silver awareness, you would not be in a position to explain the unitary character. It is a single cognition, and you have explained it away by reducing it to two cognitions, by reducing it to a loose assembly, a loose conglomerate of two cognitions. You can't do that. So you cannot explain the unitary character of the disputed silver awareness. You cannot explain the determinate character of the disputed silver awareness, and you cannot explain the perceptual character of the disputed silver awareness. How can the subject have a perception of a distant silver which is situated at a distant jewelry shop? How can the subject have a perceptual cognition of that distant silver? You have not given any explanation of the perceptual character of the pratyakshatva, of the aparokshatva of that cognition. Now the Prabhakara Mimamsakas would say, the Naiyayikos, that you are also realists. You also say that something real which is situated elsewhere, a distant real, is the object of the disputed silver awareness. Right? How will you explain the perceptual character, the unitary character and the determinate character of the disputed silver awareness? Do it, show it. Then the Naiyayikos are coming up with their own prakriya of Annatha Khyatibada. They would say that, okay, my process is foolproof. What is our process? The subject has a sense-object contact with the presented shell, the mother of pearl. On account of some defect, I have already talked of the defects yesterday. I am not repeating those things today. On account of some defect, owing to some defect, the subject is unable to perceive the specific characteristics of the shell, which is Shuktitva, being a mother of pearl. He can't perceive the specific characteristics. But he is perceiving some other general characteristics such as Chakchikko, etc. And because of those similarities, and Sir told me to mention the definition of similarity, Sadrishya is defined as Tad Bhinnatve Sati Tadgata Bhuyo Dharmavatvam. On account of those similarities, the subject is remembering, or the memory traces of distant silver are aroused. Those memory traces are giving rise to a truncated recollection of the distant silver. Up to this point, the process is exactly the same as the Akhyatibada process, as the prakriya of Akhyatibada. But now the Naiyayikos are showing their genius. They are saying that this truncated recollection of the distant silver, that would act as an extraordinary sense-object contact, as a jnana lakshana sannikarsha between the subject's visual sense and the distant property. And that would relate the distant silver to the visual sense of the subject. Now, a textual question, we need to address a textual question, that who first talk of this Sriti Jnana as the Sannikarsha? Who first proposed that the Sriti Jnana can act as a Sannikarsha? And I here am proposing that no one before Gangesha did that. Because in Annatha Khyatibada of Gangesha's Tattva Chintamani, Gangesha wrote, Srite Sanskaro Va Sannikarsha. Sannikarsha, Srite Sanskaro Va. Okay, so Gangesha also has two things in mind, that either the memory traces or the truncated recollection arising out of the memory traces, any of those two may act as a sense-object contact between the subject's sense organ and the distant property. So I am saying that this is my submission, that no one before Gangesha talked of the Jnana Lakshana Sannikarsha. Bhatushpati didn't do that, Jayanto didn't do that, and I think Udayana also didn't do that. Okay, it is Gangesha who first proposed that the Sriti can act as a Sannikarsha. Okay, so now the Advaitins would now ask the Naiyayikos, are now moving on to the Advaita view, leaving aside the Buddhist view and the Madhva view, because we may run short of time. I also would like to say something about the modern writers' work on correction of error, because this is a seminar on tradition, continuity and participation. We must talk of both tradition and modernity. Okay. And so, I am now moving on to Anirvachaniya Khyatibada. The Advaitins are the harshest critics of the Naiyayikos. The Advaitins would ask the Naiyayikos, tell me, if this Jnana Lakshana Sannikarsha can function as a sense-object contact, then there will be no possibility of inferential cognition. There will be uchcheda of anumiti. This argument was given in the Anumana Parichedo of Vedanta Paribhasha by Dharmaraja Dwarindra. Okay, there he has shown that if one admits Jnana Lakshana Sannikarsha, then he will be not in a position to admit inferential cognitions. Now, the Advaitins, the main argument of the Advaitin is a very simple one. Madhusudana Saraswati in his Advaita Siddhi has stated it in one line. Satya na badhyeto, asatya na pratiyeto. Satya na badhyeto, asatya na pratiyeto. Now, what is the argument? The argument is not as simple as it appears to be. Still, Madhusudana's genius was that he stated it in just one line. And Madhusudana was the first person who gave the technical definition of Badhitattva. I'll mention that. And also the technical definition of Mithvatva as Pratipanna Badho Toikaliko Nishedha Pratiyogitvam Mithyatva. But that preserves both the two marks of Mithyatva of which I spoke yesterday, the Aparakshava Bhasa Vishayatva and Badhitattva. Those are the two main marks of Mithyatva. Now, Madhusudana says that, let me ask about the silver. Is this silver real or unreal? Is this silver real or is this silver unreal? If it is real, suppose the Naiyayikas would say, they would definitely say that the silver is something real. They won't admit anything unreal or anything that is less than real, which is featuring as an object of any cognition. They wouldn't admit any such thing. They are realists. They are hardcore realists. So they would say, okay, it is real. Now the Advaitins would ask the Naiyayikas, if it is real, why is it falsified by a subsequent cognition? Why is it badhito? And what is badho? Madhusudana is defining badho as a badhito cognition as or a badhito property as swaprakaraka pratiti visheshya nishtha traikalika nishedha pratiyogitvam vadhitatvam. Swaprakaraka pratiti visheshya nishtha traikalika nishedha pratiyogitvam vadhitatvam. Now what is the purpose, what is the significance of this definition? Swa, whenever there is a swa in any definition, it stands for the lakshya, the definiendum. Now what is the definiendum in this case? It is the badhito property. So Madhusudana is saying, look for any cognition in which this badhito property features as the qualifier, as the prokara. Okay, so look for any pratiti where this badhito property will be the prokara. So that will be idam rajatam, cognition of the form idam rajatam, where rajatatva will be the prokara. Next, Madhusudana is urging us to consider the visheshya of that cognition. What is the visheshya of that pratiti? Idam. Now Madhusudana is saying, see whether that property has its stoikaliko nishedho in that visheshya or not. If the visheshya possesses the stoikaliko nishedho of that property, then that property will be a badhita property, a mithya property. Okay? Here the idam is nothing but a shell, a mother of pearl. It didn't have silverhood in the past. It doesn't have silverhood in present. It will not have silverhood in future. So there is stoikaliko nishedho of rajatatva in shukti, and the visheshya of the pratiti is idam, which is abhinna with the shukti, and shuktika possesses the stoikaliko nishedho of rajatatva. So here rajatatva, which is featuring as a prokara of the pratiti idam rajatam, must be a badhito property, must be a mithya property. But that will not happen in case of a samyag rajata pratiti. Why? Because in that case the idam will be identical with a piece of silver, and that idam will possess silverhood. That had possessed silverhood in past, that possesses silverhood in present, and that will possess silverhood in future. So that this, in case of a veridical situation, In case of a veridical cognition which is of the form, this is silver, there this will have silverhood. It will not have the absolute absence of silverhood. It will not be qualified by the absolute absence of silverhood. It will be qualified by silverhood itself. So this is precisely the distinction between a abadhita cognition and a badhita cognition. And this is what is meant by badhitatva. Please see that this definition of badhitva is quite close to the narrow definition of tadvati, tadabhavavati, tatprakarako anubhava ajathatva. It's quite close. In fact, this definition was proposed by Madhusudana Saraswati, the definition of badhitatva. And Madhusudana was very well conversant in Nobonayam. He has studied Tattva Chintamani very well. He came after Gangeshu and he was very conversant in Nopunayam. And he employed the techniques of Nopunayam in his Advaita Siddhi. Okay, he employed the techniques of Tattva Chintamani in his Advaita Siddhi. So, Madhusudana said that here the property is falsified by a later cognition. So, it cannot be a real property. The mark of reality is avadhitatva. The mark of reality, why is pure consciousness regarded as paramarthika sat, as ultimately real? Because it is not sublated, not falsified even by the Viddad Anubhava, even by the Brahma Sakshatkara. Whenever the person has Brahma Sakshatkara, he realizes Aham Brahmasmi, I am identical with pure consciousness, Neho Nanasti Kinchano. So everything else is falsified, but consciousness itself is not falsified. So consciousness alone is the only avadhita thing in the universe, and that is why it is the only paramarthika padartha. Everything else is badhita. The tables and chairs, our bodies, our mind, our sense organs, everything will be falsified at the time of liberation. But these things are not falsified at the time of our waking experience. They are not bhavaharo kalo bhatyo. That is why Vivadanacharya would call them vyavaharika sat padarthas, right? But avidya, which is the material cause of this universe, it is a vyavaharika padartha, but also a pratitika padartha. It is a gyatoika sat padartha. Why? Because it cannot have any agyato satta. It cannot lead any unknown existence. Because if we ascribe unknown existence to avidya, then we will have to admit another avidya for covering the mula avidya. Then we will have an infinite regress of avidyas. And there is no need to cover avidya, because avidya is itself essentially of the nature of a veil. It is essentially a covering. It is avrita svabhava. There is no need to admit a cover of avidya, and there is no pramana in favor of an avidyantar, a second avidya. So, avidya, which is the root cause of the universe, is vyavahariko, but it is pratitiko. It is gyatoiko sat. It stays as long as its pratiti stays, right? But the Shukti Rajato, it is Pratibhasiko. Why is it Pratibhasiko? Because it will be badhito, it will be falsified during our waking experience. Bhavaharo kala badhatvam pratibhasiko satvam. It will be falsified within our waking experience, before liberation, right? But the Shukti Rajato, besides being Pratibhasiko, it is Pratitiko as well. Because it doesn't have any unknown existence. Why? Because it stays, it endures as long as its cognition stays. Next, the Madhva Vedantins may say, okay, if it cannot be real, if the Shukti Rajato cannot be real, let it be unreal. Let it be unreal. If it cannot be real, we have understood that it's not real, then let it be unreal. Okay, I understand. He's from the media, isn't he? No, he's our photographer. Okay. You can read. I have no objection to your reading a paper. Because he's not exactly a researcher or a student in philosophy. But I want my students to understand me, and I would request my students to come forward. Come forward. Why are you sitting in the back? The students. They must come forward. Okay. Let it be unreal. But Madhusudana would then argue that the object of an illusory experience cannot be unreal either. Why? Because an absolutely unreal entity cannot be the object of an immediate experience. Asatya na pratiyetu. A shashasringo, a hair fawn, which doesn't exist in reality. A skylotus, an akasha kusumo, a bandhaputra, a barren woman's son. These things which do not exist in reality, they cannot appear in an immediate experience. Please note that these things can appear in immediate experience. I can just draw the picture of a hare and put two horns on the head of that picture. I can do that. You will have a cognition of a hare's horn, but that will be only a immediate cognition. You cannot perceive hare's horn. But this Shukti Rajato is something which one can perceive. So, asatya na pratiyetu. And how can you perceive the relation? The Advaitins would ask the Naiyayikos, do you perceive any relation between the presented this and the distant silver? The Naiyayikos would say, yes, we do perceive a relation. That is why the cognition idam rajatam, it is a vishishta bhranti jnanam, not a loose conglomerate of two cognitions as the Prabhakara proposed. Okay, so this is a unitary cognition, one knowledge, one cognition, and here we are perceiving a relation between this and silverwood, and the property silverwood. What is that relation? The Naiyayikos would say that we are perceiving the relation of samabhaya. Now the Advaitins would ask the Naiyayikos, is this samabhaya real or unreal? Is it real or is it unreal? Right? Now what is this samabhaya? It is idam anuyogiko. What is the locus of this samabhaya? Idam, this. And what is the counter correlative? The pratiyogin of the samabhaya. Sarpat rajatatva. Idam rajatam, in the pratiti idam rajatam. Idam is the anujogi or the locus of samabhaya, and rajatatva is the pratiyogin, the counter correlative of samabhaya. So this is an idam anuyogiko, rajata pratiyogiko samabhaya. But is there any such samabhaya in the external world? Because the idam does not bear the relation of samabhaya to rajatatva. The idam is a shukti. It bears the relation of samabhaya to shuktitva. How can it have the relation of samabhaya with rajatatva? And how does the subject perceive the relation of samabhaya here? The Naiyayikos are ready with their answer. The Naiyayikos would say there is a very curious similarity between the erroneous situation and a veridical situation. And what is that similarity? In case of the veridical situation also, there is no distinction between the cognition of the general characteristics and the cognition of the property. Okay? The subject is not aware of any distinction. Bhedagraha is present there also. Why? Because actually there is no distinction between this and Rajatattva. In a veridical situation, this is silver. This is identical with silver. So actually there is no distinction between this and a silver. So in a veridical situation, the distinction is not actually there. So the subject is not aware of any distinction. The subject has Vedagraha there also. Here also the subject has Vedagraha. But here actually there is a distinction between this and silver. Because of this similarity, because Vedagraha is present in both the cases, the subject is reminded, the memory traces of samabhaya are aroused. The memory traces of samabhaya are aroused, which give rise, these memory traces give rise again to a truncated recollection of samabhaya. that samavaya relates the distant samavaya, which is not present here, or it may be present here between something else. It relates samavaya with the visual sense of the subject as a jnana lakshana sannikarsha, and the subject is perceiving samavaya. Now Madhusudana would ask the Naiyayikos, what will be the ontological status of this samavaya? Will you say that this samavaya is real? You can't say that there is a real relation of samavaya between this and silver wood. You can't say that, because this is not silver. So you can't say that this samavaya is something real. This samavaya will be falsified later by the badhaka pratyaya nedam rajatam kintu shukti. Okay, so this cannot be real. Satya na badhyetu. If it were thought, if it were real, it wouldn't have been falsified. And is this unreal? If it were absolutely unreal, it would not have featured in an immediate experience. Asatya na pratyetu. So he will repeat the same argument against the samavaya. Right? Now, the Naiyayikos would ask the Advaitins that, do you admit a unitary, a determinate cognition in an erroneous situation? The Advaitins would say, yes, definitely. We admit determinate unitary cognitions in erroneous situations. But how do they arise? Then the Advaitins will propose their own prakriya of anirvachaniya khyatibadu. Up to a particular stage, the prakriya is the same as that of the pravakaro, but later they will propose their own things. And what is that prakriya? The subject sense organ is coming into contact. The subject sense organ is coming into contact with the presented this. The subject is perceiving the general characteristics, but is unaware of the specific characteristics because of some defect. There is some similarity between the perceived general characteristics and some distant property, and the property of some distant object. And the memory traces of those distant objects are aroused. Here the Naiyayikos would say that the memory traces give rise to a truncated recollection. The Pravakaras would also say that. The Advaitins will not say that. They will say that the memory traces, the sanskaras, along with the adhisthana samanya dhyana of idam and the doshas, they produce a vikshobha, a transformation of avidya, which covers the Vishayavachinna Chaitanya. Chaitanya is present everywhere on the Advaita view. It is sarvavyapi. So Chaitanya is present here, it is present there also. And it is Chaitanya alone which reveals an object. If something is superimposed, adhyasta on Chaitanya, then Chaitanya will reveal that object if Chaitanya is unfolded, if it is uncovered. But as long as it is covered by avidya, it cannot reveal anything which is superimposed on that part of Chaitanya. So, what is happening here is the avidya which covers the Vishayavachinna Chaitanya, the Shuktiyavachinna Chaitanya, it is being transformed. And two things are arising out of avidya. What are those two things? First, the pratitiko and the pratibhasiko shukti rajato is arising out of that avidya. Right? So, something new is produced. That is a navina rajatam, navinam rajatam, navina sarko, which is produced there. And that is tatkalatpanno. And that is pratibhasiko, because it will go away, it will go out of its existence as soon as the badhaka pratyaya arises. And another thing is produced, that is the arthadhyasa. Yesterday, Mishraji, Prafula Mishraji, our Vice Chancellor, was talking of Jnanadhyasa and Arthadhyasa, and that is the Arthadhyasa, which is arising out of avidya there, not in my mind, but out there. Out of the avidya which covers the Vishayavachinna Chaitanya, the Shuktiyavachinna Chaitanya. And another thing will arise out of avidya. Not only just two things. Dharmaraja Adhvarindra, while commenting on Dharmaraja Adhvarindra's Vedanta Paribhasha, late Pandit Panchanand Shastri showed that 8 things arise out of avidya in an erroneous situation. 8 things. There are 8 things. You can go through Paribhasha Sangraha and you will find a list of all those 8 things. Now, another very important thing arises out of avidya. Now we have an antakarana vritti of idam, but we don't have an antakarana vritti of shuktika. If I perceived shuktika as shuktika, I would not have proceeded to take it. I would not have mistaken it for silver. So, I don't have any antakarana vritti of shuktika. Now, the avidya which covers this antakarana vritti of achinna chaitanya, that transforms itself into the shape of shukti jnana, into the shape of the non-veridical cognition of a shell. So, this is the jnanadhyasa. Vrittiyavachinna chaitanya nishta avidya, that transforms itself into the shape of the rajata jnana. And Shuktiyavachinna chaitanya nishta avidya, that transforms itself in the shape of tatkalatpanna pratibhasika rajata. That rajata stays as long as the bhranti jnana stays. So, the rajata and the rajata jnana, the erroneous cognition and its object are contemporaneous. They arise simultaneously and they are destroyed simultaneously by the corrective cognition. They are destroyed simultaneously by the corrective cognition. So, they are contemporaneous. So, they are exact contemporaries. So, the rajata stays as long as the rajata jnana stays. So, it cannot lead any unknown existence. It cannot have any agyata sattva. It is jnatoika sat, it is a jnatoika sat or a pratitika padartha. It is not merely pratibhasika, it is also a pratitika padartha. Right? Before moving on, I must mention that Nrsimhasrama, who was the Paramaguru of Dharmaraja Adhvarindra and a senior contemporary of Madhusudana Saraswati, doesn't admit Sattatra Vidyavada. Okay? He only admits Paramarthika Sat and Aparamarthika Sat. So, he brings these two categories, Vyavahariko and Pratibhasiko, under the same category. Yesterday, you were worried about the issue whether avidya or the jagat should have a higher level of reality than the Shukti Rajat. And Madhusudana bring all of them under the same category. They say that they constitute the Paramarthiko, the Mithya entities. He doesn't distinguish between Vyavahariko and Pratibhasiko. He says that both these kinds of things are Satvena Pratyamano. They appear as real, but they are actually not real. They are really not real. Only Brahman is real, ultimately real. These things are not ultimately real, but they appear as real because the reality of Brahman is superimposed on them. They appear as real because of the reality of Brahman. So this is Nrsimhasrama's originality. He doesn't admit Sattatra Vidyavada. But Madhusudana, of course, admits Sattatra Vidyavada. Vimanacharya also has spoken of Vyavahariko and Pratibhasiko entities. So the distinction was present both in Panchapadika and in Vivarana, as early back as in Vivarana. And as we all know, this is a bit telling a story that Panchapadika Karo was a direct disciple of Shankara. And the legend goes like this, that Panchapadika Karo lost Panchapadika while he was traveling. But he read out the entire Panchapadika before Shankara while starting his journey, before proceeding on his journey. And Shankara was a Srutidhara, and so he recited back Panchapadika after Padmapadacharya came back. So the Panchapadika now we have is an incomplete book. Okay, we don't have Panchapadika of the later adhyayas of Shankara Bhashya, and these 5 padas were dictated by Shankara himself. This is how the story goes.
His uncle burned it, no? He was a Karmakandi.
Who?
Padma's uncle.
No, I am speaking of Padmapada himself. Padmapada was a direct disciple of Shankara. And Shankara, yes, of course you know it.
There are so many stories
Yes, I am just repeating this story for the... No, I am telling this story because of a reason. Just to show the authenticity of Panchapadika. Panchapadika was seen by Shankara himself. Shankara himself saw Panchapadika. He didn't see Vivarano, but he saw Panchapadika. So one can't question the authenticity of Panchapadika. Okay. Okay, let me proceed. Now, one might say that why are the Advaita Vedantins admit so many mithya entities? So many mithya entities, right? Aren't they just multiplying the number of entities by admitting? Yes. Huh?
Sugar?
Yes. By admitting Mainongian entities. Now, the point of the Advaita Vedantins is this, that
Now, Rupa, you can go to Keshavacharya.
yes, I am moving on to Keshavacharya. The point is this, unless you admit some non-ordinary objects, you won't be in a position to explain the erroneous situation. And this is not something very extraordinary. Please note that as hardcore realists as Bertrand Russell also admitted sense data. People admit non-ordinary objects such as sense data, such as the forms of cognition, such as the ideas, the images, only to explain the illusory appearance. A hardcore realist who doesn't admit anything but a real entity will not be able to give a proper explanation, a satisfactory account of an erroneous situation. This point is emphasized by Tim Crane in his problem of perception. Okay, he said that the argument is this: in the erroneous cognition, S appears as F, as possessing the property F. But in reality, S doesn't possess, the substance S doesn't possess the property F. So, the appearance must not be an appearance of something real. It must be of some non-ordinary thing, some non-ordinary objects, such as images, ideas, impressions, mental constructions, sense data. All these things need to be interpolated to give a satisfactory account of the perceptual situation, at least of an erroneous perception. So, the Advaita Vedantins, the Naiyayikos are discussing live issues, which are being discussed today also. You will find plenty of articles in the internet, even in the internet, in Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on the problem of perception. Okay. Now, I am moving on to K.C. Bhattacharya on correction of error. This is my main paper, in fact. And I am going to read it out. I will also explain from time to time. Correction or revision of beliefs is as much an epistemologist's concern as is their justification. By justification, we mean all those processes. Okay, that doesn't matter. I am used to having tea while talking. Correction or revision of beliefs is as much an epistemologist's concern as is their justification. By justification, we mean all those processes which confer, and techniques by which we confer epistemic status upon a belief, by which we say that, by employing which we say that this belief is veridical and this belief is non-veridical. It is all those processes that come under the name of justification. Revision or correction is the reverse process, through which a belief is divested, is shorn of its epistemic status. The processes of belief revision or error correction have attracted the attention of philosophers due to several reasons. First, by analyzing the process of correction, one gains knowledge about what is being corrected. That is, correction provides a clue to the nature of the erroneous cognition. K.C. Bhattacharya is mentioning all this. This is from Bhattacharya. Second, by paying attention to the process through which a belief is deprived or divested of its epistemic status, one gains knowledge about one's own faculties of knowledge. Third, the processes of error correction also provide important knowledge about that which is believed or known, that is about the object. It also provides important knowledge about the object. So these are the three reasons why we study this non-veridical situation, the phenomenon of correction. This paper is mainly based upon Bhattacharya's article Correction of Error as a Logical Process. I have also referred to Bhattacharya's article, The False and the Subjective. He has another article called The False and the Subjective. In this article, K.C. Bhattacharya, one of the most original and acute thinkers of modern India, reviewed a few leading theories about error correction. Bhattacharya does not mention any name in this article. He doesn't mention the name of any philosopher, and that is the difficulty with the article. The theories that are examined in this article are presented in their most abstract forms. He is giving a very abstract presentation. This absence of all concrete reference in Bhattacharya's article makes the commentators' task extremely challenging. The article starts by mentioning two curious features of correction. Bhattacharya first mentions two curious features of correction or belief revision. What are they? First, Bhattacharya observes that correction involves two processes. The process of correction involves two processes, of which the latter succeeds the former. These two processes may be expressed as follows, and Bhattacharya is expressing them as follows. The subject is now aware that she believed this object before her to be this snake. This is a complicated formulation, but still Bhattacharya formulates it in this manner. Yes.
Yeah.
The subject is, this article is entitled Correction of Error as a Logical Process. In his studies in philosophy, 2 volumes. It can be obtained in studies. All the articles are there. It's easily available. It's in the Golpak Ramakrishna Mission. The books are there. The first step is, the subject is now aware that she believed this object before her to be this snake. She believed this object to be this snake. She now believes that was not a snake. She now believes that this object was not a snake. Earlier she believed this object to be a snake, but now she is aware of the fact that this was not a snake. The argument that Bhattacharya offers to establish this point is in the form of a reductio ad absurdum. If correction, please note, this is a reductio ad absurdum which is being offered by Krishna Babu. Krishna Babu is saying, if correction were a single unitary process, then it could have been expressed adequately by a single complex sentence. If it were a single process, if it were not a combination of two processes, then it could have been expressed by a unitary single complex sentence. And that complex sentence would have the form, this, that I believed as this snake is not snake. This, that I believed to be this snake earlier, is not actually a snake. For this complex sentence does not make it clear that the corrective function is not directed towards this, but towards what this was taken to be. The corrective function is not correcting the object, but what the object was taken to be. That what this snake was taken to be was earlier believed to be a fact and is not now believed to be a fact. The snake this was earlier believed to be a snake, and that was earlier taken as a fact. but now it is not taken as a fact. Bhattacharya reminds us that this content is not believed as a fact and is not believed as a past fact and is not merely suggested as a possible situation. This is not a possible state of affairs either. Okay. The corrective function is directed towards the facthood of this content and not towards a certain naming of this previously believed content. The corrective function is not directed just towards naming this content as snake, but towards the facthood of this content, that this is a snake was not, when this was believed to be a snake, but that belief didn't believe the fact. What was believed? The content was not a fact. The process of correction can be expressed only through two steps: an earlier belief in the facthood of a particular content and a later disbelief in the facthood of the same content. So it takes two steps, the Viparjaya and the Badhaka. Without the two steps, the corrective procedure cannot be expressed properly. The second remark which Bhattacharya makes at the very outset is that correction is an epistemological function. It cannot be expressed in the form of a negative judgment. Correction cannot, this is a very original remark made by Krishna Babu, that correction cannot be expressed as a negative judgment.
Correction cannot be
Expressed in the form of a negative judgment. Why?
This is not a snake.
Yes, but that doesn't explain, that doesn't represent the entire process of correction. That is what, this is not a snake means that the property snake is not being ascribed to this, but that is not correction. Correction is this that I believe, this I earlier believed to be a snake, and now I disbelieve that content. Earlier I believed a particular content, earlier I believed the facthood of a particular content, and now I do not believe, do not have belief in the facthood of that content.
No, this is a very important statement.
Yes, this is a very important statement, a landmark statement.
Like when we say that correction cannot be
Expressed in the form of a negative judgment.
judgment, like when whatever this stands for is okay. In order to correct,
This has a very great insight behind it.
no. Whatever may be the content of this, in order to bring or in order to come back to the state of being.
Now, let me proceed because I am running out of time. How much time do I have left?
You just finish, like, like wherever you want to finish, we'll discuss.
Yes.
No, you got get that point now. See,
Yes.
whenever you say that the content of this is something, and what is pratiti is something else.
Yes.
So in order to come from pratiti to the content of this,
Yes. And what is being...
You need a negative judgment. Is it?
Yes, the corrective cognition takes the form of a negative judgment. But the entire process of correction cannot be expressed by means of a negative judgment. That is what he says.
Like taking, you can only say this, that Brahman, suppose you are talking from Brahman's angle, then there will be no negative judgment which can bring you to that. That can be understood from only that angle.
No,
If it is a Javaharika, the Prapanchik world, it needs only a negative text.
no, what Bhattacharya is saying is a bit crouched in an archaic language. But we can spell it out in more modern language, and then it will not appear as so appealing. Let me proceed. A paragraph, it will become clear. Bhattacharya states that there is no unitary logical form to express correction. Now, what does Bhattacharya mean by the expression logical form? Bhattacharya uses this expression in a somewhat archaic manner to mean a form which can be defined with reference to the content of a belief alone, and which has no reference to the function of believing or disbelieving. If it can be expressed by means of a single logical form, then it has reference to the content alone and not to the force, to the functions of believing or disbelieving, or it doesn't have any reference to the propositional attitude. To express Bhattacharya's position, to express Bhattacharya's thought in modern terms, in modern terminology, correction or belief revision is an epistemological function which involves two distinct or opposite propositional attitudes, holding two different propositional attitudes towards the same content. This is quite understandable.
Absolutely.
This is what Bhattacharya is telling here in an archaic language.
Still the problem is not gone.
No, the problem is if the content of a negative sentence can be expressed by means of a single content. But here we are holding two attitudes towards the same content.
No, not even two. You can have 3, 4, 5.
Yes, yes.
You can have
More than one attitude. Yes, yeah. More than one attitude towards the same content.
Negativity cannot be dismissed.
Yes, the negativity is not being dismissed. What he is saying, no, what he is saying that the content of a negative judgment can be expressed in the form of a single content and holding a single attitude towards that content. But here, in this phenomenon, a person is holding two different attitudes, or to use your term, which is very satisfactory, more than one attitude towards the same content. The content is a single content, and the person is holding two different propositional attitudes towards the same content. That is what Bhattacharya is saying.
Still the problem is not solved. To me, like,
Yes.
but there is one way of solving it.
One thing can be answered that this using a negative statement won't give a complete knowledge of how this correction process is
It's taking place.
That is why we will need more than one proposition to explain the process of correction.
Even if there are 10 propositions, negative judgment has to be there for correction.
Yes, a negative judgment has to be there. I got your point. I get your point. That has to be there.
Yeah.
But that alone will not characterize, will be sufficient to, it's a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient to give an account of the entire situation.
No, it is not supplement. It is not sufficient to give the ontological status of the object of this. You can say like that. Idam cannot be spoken by negativity. That's all you can say.
Yes.
Ultimately, well, let us see what
What Bhattacharya has to say. This is not what I am saying. This is what Krishna Babu is saying. And Krishna Babu says, Bhattacharya next proceeds to examine one particular view about correction, which he refers to as the extreme view. He refers to this view as the extreme view. On this view, the previous consciousness is not a belief of the unity, this thing. It needs to be mentioned here that Bhattacharya is not referring to a single theory, not only to the Pravakara theory, by the phrase the extreme view. As a matter of fact, he is here examining a number of alternative theories having one common feature, namely none of these theories subscribes to the thesis that the content of the first consciousness is the determinate unity, this thing. Later it will be seen that the theories reviewed under this alternative are all realist theories. These are all realist theories. So Bhattacharya first examines all the realist theories together. A theory of correction falling under this group may assume several different forms. First, one might say that previously there were two beliefs, a belief in this and a belief in snake. And these two beliefs were not distinguished, very much like the Akhyatibadin's position. The subject was previously not aware that he had two distinct beliefs. He had Vedagrah. Clearly, Bhattacharya is here referring to a theory that closely resembles the Pravakara and the Sankhya theories of error known as Akhyatibada. The Pravakara Mimamsakos uphold a thesis. Then I have given an exposition of the Pravakara thesis, which is now not needed, so I am skipping it. And all these theories will say that as long as the subject does not have any previous belief as to the unity between the determinandum, that is this, and the determinant, there is no error and consequently no correction. Bhattacharya observes that the theories of this type can be refuted only by an appeal to consciousness or direct experience. But he also notes that any such appeal to consciousness is bound to be inconclusive. He says that you have to appeal to the form of the Bandyopadhyay. For the corrective cognition does not clearly show whether the previous belief of the subject was a unitary belief or it was only a juxtaposition of two distinct and unconnected beliefs. The corrective cognition doesn't clearly show that, whether the earlier belief was a juxtaposition of two beliefs or whether it was a single belief. The Pravakara Mimamsakas contend that the corrective cognition is of the form, this was not snake, which only makes the subject aware of the distinction between the two beliefs earlier entertained by him. Bhattacharya, however, observes that the Pravakara analysis of the corrective cognition is not corroborated by introspective data. He writes this. Because introspection does not clearly show whether the corrective awareness is of the form, this was not snake. If it is of the form, this was not snake, and or of the form, this is not snake. If this corrective awareness were really of the form, this was not snake, that is, this was distinct from snake, then that would have clinched the issue in favor of the Pravakara Mimamsakas. But if the corrective awareness is of the form, this is not snake, then it does not straightforwardly indicate that the previous belief entertained by the subject was in reality a loose conglomerate of two distinct beliefs. Introspective data does not provide any clue as to what is the exact form of the corrective awareness. Bhattacharya concludes his examination of these theories with the comment that as the corrective experience does not clearly show that the content of the earlier belief was not a unity, there is sufficient scope for presuming that it was a unity. In the concluding section of this paper, we shall observe that theories of this type have been subjected to an incisive criticism by other theories, and the criticisms that have been leveled against these theories do not invariably make an appeal to our direct experience. And I have already referred to these criticisms in detail. Later, Bhattacharya examines the neo-Hegelian idealist theories. I am not going into that section right now because you have told me to conclude in 5 minutes. So I am just coming to the conclusion of my paper. The excellence of Bhattacharya's analysis lies in the fact that it brings out the essence of the different kinds of theories. He is making a meta-level discussion. He has undertaken a meta-level discussion, and he is making a meta-level discussion of different kinds of theories. This is a second-order discussion. The article is couched in archaic language, but when shorn of the linguistic peculiarities, what this article tries to establish is something extremely general and universal. It classifies all theories regarding perception and correction into two major groups. Under the first group falls all those theories which maintain that the subject knows the external object directly without the help of any presentation. Under the second group comes all those theories which uphold the hypothesis that the subject knows the external objects only through some presented content. This presentation may be called a sense datum, it may be called an idea, a phenomenon, or whatever it may be. The Yogacara Buddhi, for all these theories, what is believed or what is disbelieved cannot be described in purely objective terms. The subjective element has to creep in. It is always a mixture of the subjective and the objective. These theories, however, do not face any difficulty in explaining the unitary character of the content of the earlier belief. The realist theories, on the other hand, are those theories which do away with all intermediaries in the perceptual scenario. Consequently, they face a great deal of problem in explaining the unitary character of the earlier belief. So, he is classifying all theories, and he is saying that those theories which admit intermediate entities, they are better off while explaining the perceptual scenario.
So, any questions? Comments?
I haven't read the whole paper. The written paper is longer.
Nice.
Oh, I have just one reference to give. Yesterday, Shamini asked of the reference of Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Na Paro. This verse is present in one of Shankara's Prakaran Granthas in a slightly different form. It is the 21st verse of Vedanta Shanga Malika. I didn't have the book yesterday with me, so I told one of my students to check up Shankara Grantha Ratnavali. It's the 21st verse of Vedanta Shanga Malika, which is also named as Brahma Namavali, and it's published in Shankara Grantha Ratnavali, edited by Rajendranath Ghosh and published by Bosumati Sahitya Mandir, Kolkata. But there, Shankara has wrote a lot of Prakarana Granthas. But there, the verse has a little bit different reading. And what is the reading?
That is the reason that he has not written. Because if somebody has written a famous saying, he will not change it.
No, I would like to tell the Pathantar also. The reading goes as follows. Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya Jiva Brahmaivo Na Paro Idamevo Hi Sat Shastram Vedanta Dindi.
I have that.
Yes,
That
yes.
again shows that Vedanta Dindigo is not written by Shankara Bhagavatam.
But Vedanta Sangha Malika is ascribed to Shankara as a Prakaran Grantha written by him. The Shankara scholars do that. It is the 21st verse of Vedanta Sangha Malika.
No, there are many texts which are ascribed to Shankara.
Yes.
But this Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya
Yes.
is a little controversial text.
Yes, yes. It is not found in the Bhashya.
Like Shankara would not say, like when you take the whole of Shankara's
Yes.
system, it looks,
Fine.
it looks a little bizarre to accept this statement from Shankara. Like that,
Okay.
that is taken along.
That's
with
what fact we have in our possession.
Yes.
We can only talk of the facts, but we don't know which story is correct and which is not.
Whenever